Night. Turn, if you will, to Genesis chapter 32. That's where we find ourselves this evening. And so as you make your way there, we will be there in just a little bit as we continue in our Old Testament study in the book of Genesis. Last week we left Jacob, his family, his servants, and all that he had. We left them as they're on the move. They're moving on. He left the clutches, if you will, the clutches of Laban, if you will. Laban, for 20 years, he served him. And now he's on his way back to his homeland. Now, it does sound like he is escaping these clutches, if you will. And in one sense, he is. He's escaping. He's leaving. He's had a desire to go back to his homeland, and he wanted to leave like 6 years earlier, and Laban talks him out of it, and it would be in those 6 years. I mean, he had already served him for 14, but in those 6 years, God would just prosper him time and time again. And we know that oftentimes Jacob has this bad rap of just being a conniver, and he is. You know, but for the last 20 years, he's met his match in a conniver, in Laban. And Laban didn't want to let him go because he understood that as he was prospering, Jacob was, then he was prospering. And since he was the boss, he was the big daddy there, man, he got richer more than ever. And so he didn't want him to go. And so, if it seems like he is escaping, he kind of is. But in one sense, the Lord had come to him, as we saw. And he told him that now it was time to go grasshopper. The old Kwai Chang Kung Fu movie or series. It was time for him to leave. He wouldn't have, if he would have left earlier, the timing probably wouldn't have been the right timing. I mean, he could have, and God would have blessed him. But there's something to be said about God's timing. That in those 6 years of laboring, of being the shepherd, of doing all this work, he had to learn some hard lessons through that time. And again, God would have blessed him probably if he would have left earlier. But there was lessons to be learned through these next 6 years that made him who he is. And we're going to see even tonight that the Lord just kind of captures his heart once again. And so he had a desire to go, to leave. But God also used the circumstances surrounding him to get him to be on the move. And things were just getting harder and harder. And needless to say, Laban, his father-in-law, was not too happy about him leaving because he kind of left on the down low, didn't tell anybody. Laban didn't find out until 3 days later, and he was upset, to say the least. Even though Laban himself had made it harder for him to stay. And he was part of that circumstances that was happening that made it harder. And as much as Laban made it seem like he was really sad that he didn't get to kiss his daughters and the babies goodbye and stuff, he was really upset about the money that he was losing out on and the prosperity that he would now be not having as much. Because he enjoyed all of that because of his son-in-law. Oh, and by the way, we did see there was a crux there. There was something else beside all that. He comes and says, "Why have you stolen my God?" His God got stolen. That's kind of sad when your God can be stolen. It's sad in so many different fronts, man. When you have to protect your God instead of your God protecting you. You know, the fact that he went searching for it, and we looked at that, and it was nowhere to be found. You know why? Because someone was sitting on his God. And I thought about that today. I thought, that is such a sad commentary. That you have to look for your God, and your God doesn't reveal himself. He is looking. He's troubled because he can't find his God, because somebody is sitting on his God. And so they do their whole covenant thingy, at the end. They do this Mizpah, And as I shared with you last week, that Mizpah thing, people, especially couples, it's like, oh, so cute. Hearts are separated from each other. It's like, no, it was a trust issue. It was a trust issue. They didn't trust each other. I know that's not the way it works with couples. Well, maybe it does, but it shouldn't. But in this situation, it was like, I don't trust you, and only God can see what you're doing. And so let's do that little Mizpah thing, man, and you go your way, I go my way, and we shall never really ever come together again, because God doesn't want us to be with each other. So they didn't trust each other. So let's read part of our text right here, verses 1 through 12, and then we'll break it up and do the whole chapter. In verse 1, it says, "So Jacob went his way, and the angels of God met him. Then Jacob saw them and said, 'This is God's camp.' And he called the name of the place Mahanaim. Then Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And he commanded them, saying, 'Speak thus to my lord Esau. Thus your servant Jacob says, I have dwelt with Laban and stayed there until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, and male and female servants. And I have sent to tell my Lord that I may find favor in your sight.' When the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, We came to your brother Esau, and he is also coming to meet you. And 400 men are with him." So Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that were with him and the flocks and herds and camels into 2 companies. He said, "If Esau comes to one company and attacks it, then the other company which is left will escape." Then Jacob said, "O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, the Lord who said to me, 'Return to your own country and to your family, and I will deal well with you.' I am not worthy of the least of all your mercies, and of all the truth which you have shown your servant. For I crossed over this Jordan with my staff, and now I have become 2 companies. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau. For I fear him, lest he come and attack me and the mother of or with the children. For you said, I will surely treat you well and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered in multitude." As I shared with you last week, Jacob is about 97 years old at this time when he leaves. He has 11 boys at this time. He has 4 women in his life who have had the 11 boys. As we see here, and I shared with you last week, he has a company with him. He has people with him. And so we don't know how big it is, but this chapter gives us a little clue that it's kind of a big company that he is traveling with. And so here he is moving along with all these kids. They're from 13 years old and younger. And these 4 wives, and he has all these male servants, all these female servants. He has all of these things, and they're traveling. It's going to be 400, 500 miles that they have to travel. So it's taking weeks, if not months, for them. It should take about a month, but it's taking weeks for them at least. They've already had an encounter with Laban. And so now we know from what we've studied last week that Jacob and his family is in the mountainous area of Gilead. And they will make their way down to the river Jabbok, which feeds into the Jordan River. So he's in this mountainous area. He's getting closer and closer to his destination because the Jordan River is not that far away. And as we read, he has quite a family. He has a lot of stuff. And so it must have been slow going. And it is at that time, as they've been traveling, that he is on his way, that it says the angels of God met him. Now, this is the only other place that we see this phrase, angels of God, in the Old Testament. We saw it earlier in chapter, about 20 years later, or earlier in chapter 28. When he was leaving the promised land, it says that he was at Bethel, and the angels of the Lord, he saw them ascending and descending to heaven. And we looked at that time that they were on this ladder going up and down the staircase, and it just kind of gave us a picture that God was telling him, hey, I am working. I am working. When you can't see that I'm working, I have my ministering angels going up and down, helping people out, doing the work that I've called them to do. And so here we are 20 years later, and Jacob is now on his way back to the promised land, and he meets up with angels once again. It's interesting because he's in this place right now where Laban is behind him. He can't go back to Laban. He escaped him. He left him. And yet, as he's going, he knows what's before him, and it's his brother. So he's in this place where the Lord has to kind of meet him where he's at. The last time he had saw his brother, probably the last words he heard from him is, I'm going to kill you. You know? That was the last thing he heard from his brother, and so he's going in that direction. But it is at this particular time where he can't go back. He knows what's in front, and if you know that there's something up in front, you're way more hesitant, going, I don't know. It could be bad. He's not worried about himself. He's worried about his whole people. And it is at that time that the angels of God show up in full force. And this phrase, angels of God, actually means hosts. The hosts of God. Which also mean a band, not like a rock band, but a band of brothers, kind of. A band, a camp, a company, an army. An army has showed up in this group of angels. Now, Hebrews chapter 1, verse 14, it tells us that it talks about angels in that chapter. It's a fascinating chapter. And it says in verse 14, are they not all ministering spirits sent forth to minister for those who will inherit salvation? I think it's interesting because we hear about angels throughout the scriptures. And yet, I think oftentimes we're fascinated with these beings, and I think oftentimes we have this misconception that we become angels and we don't. I know it's sweet to say that when somebody leaves us, it's like, oh, now they're angels. You know, there's movies about stuff like that, but we don't become angels. Angels are their own separate entity, their own separate beings. They don't need salvation. They don't understand grace the way we understand grace. We don't worship angels. We don't call on them to do our bidding. We don't command the angels to do anything. You know who commands them? God. They are at his beckoning. He is the one that tells them what to do. We don't even know they're there. And yet, they're going up and down all the time. They're being used of God. And sometimes, you know, we've all, experienced, no, I think the angel of God just kind of protected me from here and that. And it's quite possible. We don't discount those things. But we don't fall down and worship them. I think anytime in the scripture when an angel showed up and anybody falls down before them, it's like, hey, get up, man. Don't you be doing that. That's not what they're there for. They're there at God's bidding, at his beck and call, to do the work that he is. They're his ministering angels. And he sends them forth to do the work. And in this instance, he shows up and they show up in full force. Earlier, 20 years earlier, he gave them a picture of them going up and down to show Jacob, hey, I'm at work all the time, whether you realize it or not. He gave them a glimpse of what this celestial, area is, the spiritual area is where God's at work and we can't even see it. And so we don't know exactly what all of this means that they show up, but these angelic beings, which are normally unseen, are made very visible to Jacob at this time. And they met him. I don't know if they had conversation, but they met him right where he was at. In one of the most difficult times that he has, and again, he's concerned for all the people that are around him. And he sees this host, this group, this band, and he sees them. Now, it's quite possible that perhaps God wanted Jacob to know just how great his care was for him. You're concerned because you've just left Laban, who chased you, who really wanted to do you harm, but I stopped him. You're concerned because what's ahead of you is a man that last time you saw him, he wanted to kill you. And so, again, what's that saying? He's in between a rock and a hard place. And he's in this place that he's concerned what will happen. And God meets him there to say, I will take care of you. I will be there for you and for your family. I will bring a host of angels if I need to make sure that you understand that I'm taking care of you. Again, we don't see those things. We might have a vision, we might have a dream of angels and stuff, but again, it's like nothing like this. I've never experienced anything like this. I've sensed God in so many ways. I've sensed that, man, oh man, maybe one of his angels was there to minister at that time, but I've never seen something like this. But he sends his angels to minister to them. Now again, he sees them at this time, but perhaps they've always been there. He just didn't know that. But this time he wanted to make sure that Jacob understood, to show him his protection, God's protection, from what was behind him and what was before him. And he met him right where he was at. And so he calls this place, he says, this is God's camp. This is God's camp. And he called the name of the place Mahanaim. And that word Mahanaim means two camps. Probably referring to his camp of his people, all the people that he has, and God's camp over here. So there's two camps, one visible, one invisible that's become visible to him, but I don't know if it's become visible to other people. So that's why he calls this place Mahanaim, because of these two camps that are going on right now. And it is at this time now that he sees God's protective hand upon him, that he sends his messengers to go before him, because he knows his brother is probably not that far away. If he could probably see the Jordan River, Edom, which Esau would become the ruler of Edom, is on the east side of the Jordan. He is on the east side of Jordan right now. And so he's saying, I am in my brother's territory. I'm going to send messengers out to go find him and speak to him. And so he sends them because he knows that he must be in the area. Perhaps knowing that he could meet up with them at any time, it's almost like he somehow wants to soften the blow. So he sends guys out there to go say, hey, go find out where my brother is at and make sure you tell him all the things I have. Now, I don't think that he's bragging. I don't think he's boasting. But I think he's probably showing his brother. He says, I have all these things. I have no need of nothing else. I'm not going to steal anything from you like a birthright or anything. There's nothing I need. I have everything I need. Perhaps that's why he's telling them, I'm a wealthy man. God has blessed me in this area, in this arena. And it almost looks like somehow he wants to reconcile with his brother who 20 years earlier swore to kill him. And he comes to him in a way that we would look at it, it's like, man, he humbled himself to go to his brother, calling himself a servant and calling him basically the master or a lord or somebody that's superior to him. Which is kind of interesting because God said, no, he will serve you. But yet he humbles himself in such a way that it almost sounds like, no, I am here to serve you. Which doesn't sound bad at all. I think he anticipated his brother's mindset and the concerns that his brother might have. And so he humbled himself. Now, what I think is interesting, the Lord had just showed up and showed himself. There was no need to be fearful. The Lord had already promised him throughout this time that he would protect him, he would go before him. God was the one that told them to get up and leave Laban and go back to the land. He didn't say, hey, get up, leave the land, you're going to get halfway, and then you're on your own. And I don't know if I could protect you. But he's showing himself in such a way, so you almost want to go, did he really have to go and try to soften the blow, or should he have just trusted God that God has gone before him and taken care of it? My thought is he should have just trusted that the Lord would have continued to go before him. But how often do we do the same thing? And you know I was going to get to that. It's like, I know you always say that. Because again, he puts these things here for our example, because here you have a guy who God has just shown himself in such a powerful way to show him, here's all my protection at your service. I will deal with anything that comes your way. I promise that you would get back to your homeland and that you would become a great nation and all of those things. And yet, he seems like he goes in the flesh and starts doing what he thinks he should do to try and soften the blow. I think that goes back to who we are. We go back to what we know. To try and go, okay, God, I know that you're there, but let me go make sure that everything's going to flow the way I think it should flow. And I'm going to appease, basically, my brother before I get to him. And so he sends these messengers. He tells them, hey, make sure you tell him I got everything I need. I don't need anything. And they come back. And in verse 6, it says, we came to your brother Esau. And he is coming to meet you with 400 men with him. I'm sure he said, anything else? That's all you got? It's no wonder he's fearful. Bringing 400 men, you're not going to go and sing Kumbaya with those people. You're not going to go. He's not coming for a little church retreat. He's not coming to do anything. To him, you're going, what? He's coming this way? Yeah, and he has 400 guys with him. What would your thought be? He's coming to kill me. Because, again, you got to remember the last time he heard this guy. So it's not unreasonable for his head or his mind to start going in a direction of thinking, okay, we're done. We're basically done. I have all kinds of people, but I don't have 400 men. I have a lot of animals. I have a lot of servants, but we're not an army. This sounds like an army that's coming after me. And to him, he has the intentions to kill me. And so you could understand verse 7 and 8 when he says that Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. When faith is crowded out by fear, we're prone to start doing stuff that we should not be doing in the flesh. We start scheming of how we can protect ourselves from the enemy, from being hurt, from being killed. We start scheming and thinking, well, we have enough resources to take care of ourselves, to do what we're supposed to do. And so it almost seems that Jacob reverts back to what he knew. And I think that's our tendency. I don't care how long you've been walking with the Lord. When push comes to shove, when all of a sudden the faith that you thought you had is covered with fear, all of a sudden you start going like, I'll make it happen. I'll make it happen. Even if I have to revert to my old ways, I'll take care of it. Because I will do what I got to do. And when we say those things and when we do those things, it's natural for us to do that because we're familiar with those things. It's gotten us out of a bind before, and yet God's going, but I showed you all the protection. But at that moment, it's not that he forgot all the protection of God. He's just ignoring it because I got to take care of it. There's 400 men. I'm sure he didn't count the angels, but they're not 400 angels probably. I have 400 men that I'm looking at right now. And so he goes back to his own ways of scheming. And fear sets in. And we become afraid. I read this little story. And you know, I'm not big into stories, but it was about the old evangelist D.L. Moody and how this woman came to him and she says, I have this quote or this scripture that helps me. It's from Psalm 56:3 says, when I am afraid, I will trust in thee. And he says, I have a better promise for you. And he quoted Isaiah 12:2. He says, behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. And you're going like, yes, I don't want to be afraid. But Psalm 56 is just as real because I think we go to that one before we go to the other one. Whenever I'm afraid, I will trust in God. And I love that in Isaiah, it kind of gives us the offensive. It's like, no, man, God is the God of my salvation. I trust in him. I will not fear. What's before me, what's behind me? And again, it's really easy to say that when things are going good, right? But what happens when life falls apart? What happens when all of a sudden, man, you're going, I don't even know which way to go. I don't even know where my faith is right now. I kind of put it away. And it's interesting because what we see in this chapter, it's not that he forgets his faith. He ignores his faith. And there's a difference because I don't think we leave our faith. We just tend to go back to what we know. Again, if you remember back in chapter 27, it was a while back. In verse 45, Jacob's mother, Rebekah, had told Jacob to leave. And she told him, she says, leave until your brother's anger is turned away. And then she says, and then I will send for you. It's been 20 years he hasn't heard from his mom. So to him, his brother still wants to kill him. He has heard nothing. He has heard absolutely nothing. Jacob never heard back from his mom. And so as far as he knows, his brother hasn't forgotten any of this. And so he begins to divide up his people in two companies. It's interesting because he ran into two companies, two bands, two hosts in verses 1 and 2. His and God's. Now he has his, and he's divided that into two. And he begins to scheme and prepare for Esau's coming. Again, he should have trusted that God would protect him and be faithful to his word, because God is always faithful to his word. But he forgot about that other two companies, and now he has his own two companies. But it brings him to a place in verse 9 through 12, verse 9 through 12. It brings him to a place because of this fear, because of where he's at, because of what's happening in his situation. It brings him to a place where he cries out to God. And when we go through these verses again, it's such an amazing prayer that he has right here. Perhaps he should have prayed first and then made a plan. But he made the plan first, and then he prayed. And I think that's where we often end up, right? Instead of going, it's like, when somebody says, I think we should pray, it's like, we're to that point? It's like, no, that should be where we're at first. And going, Lord, I just want to seek your face because I'm so scared right now. But he makes his plan first, and then he asks God. He acknowledges God. And he says, "O God of my father Abraham and my father Isaac." Again, God had been with Isaac and Abraham for the last 200 years already. 300 years. I think it was closer to 300 years. God had been faithful to them. They had gone through their ups and downs. I'm sure he had heard the stories, but he cries out to him, to God, because God has been faithful to his father and to his grandfather. And he tells God, the Lord who said to me, you said to me to return to the country, to return to my country and to my family, and you will deal well with me, basically. And he's reminding him, you told me this, and now I'm on my way, and look at where I find myself. And I don't know if you've ever heard from the Lord, or you thought you heard from the Lord, but you heard from the Lord, and you moved ahead, and then everything kind of falls apart, and you're going, wait a minute, I thought you told me. Why is things not going the way I thought they should go? Because even when we're praying and asking God to lead us and guide us, he never said, oh, it's going to be easy. No, there's probably going to be some trials and tribulations along the road. But when he tells us to go, he will get us to the other side. It reminds me of when Jesus told his disciples to get into the boat and let's go to the other side. And he goes to sleep, of course. He's already told them we're going to the other side. He didn't say, hey, let's go to the middle of the ocean or the middle of the sea and let's drown. Then you would have had something to worry about. But they're going, don't you care? Because they're fearing for their life. And yet he told them, no, we're going to go to the other side. I don't care what kind of storms happened on that Sea of Galilee that night. Jesus said, we're going to the other side, and we're going to get to the other side. And that's the promises that he has given to us. But he didn't say it wouldn't be without pain. It wouldn't be without storms. So those are the kinds of things that he reminds us of those things. And it's okay here because he's reminding him. He's reminding God, you told me this. You told me, didn't you? And I love verse 10 because he says, I am not worthy. And you see the humility here in him of going, I don't deserve anything that you've given me. All your mercies, none of them do I deserve. And of all your truths that you have shown me, I don't deserve any of them. And I love that he gives them this insight like God didn't know. When I left, before I crossed Jordan, all I had was my staff. That's all I had. Now he has a different staff. All the servants. All I had was this staff. I was by myself. And you have gone before me and you have shown me mercy. You have given me more than I ever would have deserved, Lord. And now I'm coming back and now I have two companies. I've separated my people even. That's how big they are. And I love the fact that he humbles himself though, and he says that, but then he says, deliver me. Deliver me, I pray. God told them, you're going back, but he reminds them, I need you right now to remind me that you will deliver me. You see, again, guys, we understand God's promises, but there's times in the middle of those promises, because they linger sometimes and they last for a long time, that we have to cry out to him. It's like, are you still here with me, Lord? It feels like I haven't heard you in a few days. Can you still deliver me? Deliver me from the hand of my brother. And if you forgot his name is Esau. Deliver me from Esau, for I fear him. And I love the honesty there. I fear him, Lord. Because I'm afraid that he's going to come and attack me, and not just me. He's going to attack my wives and my kids. And in verse 12, once again, he reminds God, for you said. It's funny, when I was studying, I underlined that one. For you said, I will surely treat you well and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered in multitude. He goes back to the promise, to the covenant that he had made with his grandfather, that through them, that there would be some descendants from them. He reminded him of the covenant that not only his grandfather had, but he gave it to his father, and now he has given it to him. And he reminded him, you gave me your promise, you gave me your covenant. And I'm reminding you of this. And honestly, guys, when we get to that point, I don't think he was saying it in a disrespectful way. What you said, he's reminding God of what he had said, not because God forgot, because he didn't. But I think it's good to remind God because it reminds us. I haven't forgotten, God, what you said to me. So I'm just reminding you that I haven't forgotten. And so I'm telling you, this is what you said to me. And I think that blesses God. Because I don't know if you're like me, but oftentimes I will quote God's scripture. You said in Ephesians chapter 4. Or you said in this chapter, it's like God's going, what? You don't think I know where it's at? Just saying, God. I'm just kind of reminding you, I know that scripture because you gave it to me. And I don't think we have to do it in a bad way or in a disrespectful way. We need to do that because, again, it reminds us of what God has said. And it's good for us to know those things. I know that we can remember certain promises and certain scriptures. We never forget those scriptures. But I think oftentimes we do ignore those scriptures when we're in the heat of it. And we just have to be reminded sometimes. When he told them that I will surely treat you well. Again, God never told them that it would always be great. God never told him that in the midst of treating him well that he wouldn't have some hardship along the way. But I think that in the end, when we are reminded of the goodness of God, we have to be reminded of his faithfulness, especially when we read through the Old Testament. Because God was always faithful to his people. The promises that he gave, he never went back on them. And I don't know what promises he's given you. I just know the promises from God's word. That he will not go back on his word. And it will be sometimes in the depths of despair, when you're in the lowest of the lowest lows, that you go, Lord, are you still there? You said, Lord, you said. He says, and I will keep my promise. Again, just because he said I will treat you well, doesn't mean that it will be hunky-dory. As far as his descendants are concerned, they are on their way. He has 11 kids already. He has 11. It's already starting to grow, albeit they're all under 13 at this time. And I think one of the fears and one of the concerns that Jacob has, that if he has 400 men, and I don't care how many we have, they can wipe us out in one fell swoop. And there goes the descendants. And I think that's why he reminds God of, you said that it would be as the sands of the sea. I've already got 11 grains of sand here. And so Jacob was seriously concerned. And I think that when you look at this prayer, it's such a great prayer for us to be reminded that we can come to God in however way we can when we're hurting, when we're suffering. To pray a prayer that cries out, because he's being so honest here with everything. And so verse 13 to 21. And so he lodged there that same night and took what came into his hand as a present for Esau, his brother. 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milking camels or camels with their colts, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 foals. Then he delivered them to the hand of his servants. Every drove by itself, and said to his servants, pass over before me, and put some distance between successive droves. And he commanded the first one, saying, when Esau my brother meets you and asks you, saying, to whom do you belong, and where are you going? Whose are these in front of you? Then you shall say, they are your servant Jacob's. It is a present sent to my lord Esau, and behold, he is also behind us. So he commanded the second and the third, and all who followed the drove, saying, in this manner you shall speak to Esau when you find him. And also say, behold, your servant Jacob is behind us. For he said, I will appease him with the present that goes before me, and afterwards I will see his face. Perhaps he will accept me. So the present went on over before him, for he himself lodged that night at the camp. It's funny because he prays this amazing prayer, and yet it's probably already dark. It's probably already night. And as he wakes up in the next morning, he has to now do something. He either follows through with the prayer of trusting God, or he goes back to what he knows. And as we just read, he basically went back to what he knows. He prays this amazing prayer. He has this amazing time with God, reminding him of who he is and all of those things. And then he gets up in the morning after lodging there and all of this stuff, and he says, now let me get all the presents together. And so he gives us, 550 different animals here that he gathers together, and he separates them as he separates the group. Okay, you go. Okay, now you go and take all these things with you and give all of these to my brother when you meet him. And when you meet him and he asks these questions, you tell him all these things and give him all the cattle, all the things, all the herds. 550 animals. If somebody had 10, just 10 animals, that was a guy that was well off. To have 500 different animals to just give away, I'm not even thinking he's giving a third of his animals away. That's probably nothing in comparison to what he has. But again, he's sending all these things to him to maybe prove to him, I don't need nothing from you. But he is scared to death at this moment because he tells us that he is, because he goes, perhaps all these gifts, everything that I give him will appease him at one moment, and then he will accept me. Please, please, please. He has gone back to scheming after an amazing time with the Lord. And I think oftentimes when... I know when people come into my office for counseling and stuff, I usually say, but you know what? Guess what? Give them all what the word says and blah, blah, blah. But now you have to walk out that door. And now you have to make your own decisions as you walk out the door. What are you going to do with all that? Because you can go and say, okay, I'm going to trust that God will go before me. I don't need to send anything ahead because God's already told me he's going to get me to the other side. Or you can go back and say, let me get all these things together and let me scheme my way through once again. And so it was an all-day thing because, again, he lodged there. And then when he wakes up, he has to do all of these things, and he sends everybody out, and he gives them the spiel that they have to tell his brother. And so now, as he sent them all away, verse 21, it says, so the present went on over before him, but he himself lodged that night in the camp. And the rest of the chapter says this, and he arose that night and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, his 11 sons, and crossed over the ford of Jabbok. And he took them, sent them over the brook, and sent over what he had. Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Now when he saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his hip. And the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint, as he wrestled with him. And he said, this man, let me go, for the day breaks. But he said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. So he said to him, what is your name? He said, Jacob. And he said, your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men, and have prevailed. Then Jacob asked, saying, tell me your name, I pray. And he says, why is it that you ask me my name? And he blessed him there. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life was preserved. Just as he was crossing over Peniel, the sun arose on him, and he limped on his hip. Therefore, to this day, the children of Israel do not eat the muscle that shrank, which is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip in the muscle that shrank. And so he takes his 2 wives in that evening, and he kind of sets them aside, sets them over, and he has his wives and his kids cross over the ford of this little brook or river, Jabbok. And a ford is somewhere where you can cross over that's sure-footed to cross over a thing. It's not a truck. Well, it could be a truck, but a ford is where you have stable ground to walk over. Some of us have seen the pictures of people crossing over the Rio Grande. They're kind of crossing in places where they're sure-footed. That would be a ford. But he sends them over. And now we have this very interesting story here. that Jacob was left alone. And you can imagine what's going through his head. Understanding that he has met with God, he knows where God is at, he understands all these things, he's schemed and he's done all these things, and it seems like as he's by himself, it says that a man wrestled with him. It's not like Jacob went looking for this fight, for this wrestling. This man came, and what we see in this man, as we see later, that it's the Lord himself. What people call a Christophany, that Jesus appeared in human form here. So it's Jesus showing up to the scene, and now there's this wrestling match that's going on. And I don't know if you guys have ever watched wrestling. I like watching the MMA kind of stuff and the grappling that goes on and all that craziness. And I know people are like, oh, that's so gross. It's like, it's a man thing for the most part. But I know there's a lot of chicks that like it. But be that as it may, it's this wrestling that's going on. And again, when you punch this in and you see this one guy and this other guy, and it's like, I don't know how much of this wrestling was going on. But they were contending with one another, however it is. And when you've watched any kind of wrestling or boxing or anything that has this going back and forth, it's usually 3-minute rounds in boxing, 5 minutes in MMA, but you have this break. As you can tell, I am not a wrestler, but I like watching. But these guys, they train for this. It is exhausting. Can you imagine what we're seeing here, that they're wrestling, they're contending, however it is in a physical sense, and they're going all night long. And this shows the tenacity, I would say, of Jacob. God shows up, and he really wants to take away everything that is Jacob. Because of his stubbornness, because of his connivingness, because of him going back all the time and being a Jacob. And he wants to take all of that away from him. And it's almost like Jacob is wrestling and going, no, I'm not going to let you have it all. And it's interesting because the man finally says, let go of me. Now, I don't think that he had him in a rear naked chokehold that is like this man, God's ready to tap out. I think it's more, if you've ever seen a boxing match, that the guy is so exhausted that he just hangs on his opponent, and the guy's trying to push him off, and he's just hanging for dear life because it's like, I'm just waiting for the bell. He is exhausted. Jacob is exhausted, not the man. But he says, you got to let me go. He said, I'm not letting go. I'm not letting go until you bless me. And when he says to him, what is your name? It's not that he didn't know his name. He wants to hear Jacob say, my name is Jacob, because it means that I'm a scoundrel. It means I'm a supplanter. It means that I connive and I do all of these things. And he wanted to hear it from him and say, look at where it's gotten you, Jacob. Look at where it's gotten you. You're still conniving. You're still doing all of these things. I've showed myself to you time and time again, and you're still a Jacob. And I love the fact that he said, and you will always be a Jacob. He didn't tell him that. But he wrestled with them, but he wanted to hear from him and say, it's gotten you in trouble. The blessing comes when he says, your name's no longer Jacob. It will be Israel. You're no longer have to be the supplanter. Again, people say, well, it's just my upbringing. It's just my heritage. I can't help it. Yes, you can. In Christ, he can change your character. He can change you. Just because my dad was an alcoholic doesn't mean I have to be one. Just because he was a pervert doesn't mean I have to be a pervert. Just because he's dead, it doesn't mean that. The word Israel means governed by God. That he wrestled with God and God rules. That's what Israel means. And that's what he told them. And I love the fact that he says, I'm giving you this name because you've wrestled with God. Again, it wasn't a bad wrestling. It was a struggle. It was a contending. It's like, and finally he's going, I'm not going to let you go, Lord. I'm not going to let you go. And he says, and you've prevailed. He didn't win. He didn't win because you know what? He goes off limping. But this is the tenacity of this man. I've never had a dislocated shoulder. I've known people that do or have, and it hurts. I understand that a dislocated hip is so painful that there's a lot of pain involved in this. And this guy, even with a dislocated hip, is not going to let go. And so he prevails in that sense, but he doesn't win. But he's going to walk away limping. And for the rest of his life, he will never forget this moment that he met up with God. You know why? Every time he took a step, he would remember. Remember that night, man. It was a good night. I lost bad. I lost the old Jacob, and he gave me a new name. But he remembered. There's a good book out there. It's called Leading with a Limp for leaders. Because we all have a limp, guys. Every last one of us. We can wrestle with God, and it's okay to wrestle with God and have those moments of going, Lord, I'm not going to let you go. But let him change you. Let him change you from within. Whoever you used to be, again, it's going to be there. He's going to be called Jacob more times probably than he's called Israel still. He's just one of those guys like, dang, you're such a Jacob, bro. It's just... But yet, we know that Israel is the one that's governed by God. And the promise will come through Israel. And all of that. And so he asks his name, but he doesn't give it to him. I don't know why. But it's not like Jacob didn't know who he was, because he names the place Peniel, which means the face of God. And when he says, I seen God face to face, he didn't see God the Father face to face. He saw a Christophany. He saw the glory of God, but he didn't see him face to face, because you can't see him face to face and live. But to him, it's like, dude, I still won because I saw his glory. And it's interesting because verse 32 tells us that now from here on out, the children of Israel don't eat that part of the meat or that part of the animal. God never told them they couldn't. They just like, oh no, we can't touch it. It's like, you're probably missing out on some good meat, bro. Let's pray.